Welcome to the third week of lectures. We're continuing with our theme of models of technological change. This week, turning to discontinuous models of change, and we're going to go back and try to review just a little bit. Re- Recall our thesis here. That knowledge about patterns of change is useful because it will tell us something about how they evolve, when change is likely to occur, and hopefully something about who is likely to win. Last week with continuous models, we described the product lifecycle model, diminishing returns driven models, including the S curves, and variation selection retention. Remember, in both models, the you enter a period of stasis in which diminishing returns set in, then the new technology is introduced, you go through a period of change, and then stability reigns. Demand models are based on models of information diffusion, and the core model there is Rogers' model. A variation on that was Moore's chasm. This week we're going to look at three different market-driven models of technological change: Henderson's architectural change model, Christensen's disruptive technology model, and McGann's model of industry evolution. Rebecca Henderson out of MIT, wonderful economist. Clay Christensen, you've heard of. He's a Utah legend, legendary professor at Harvard, noted Harvard Business Review author. Anita McGann is absolutely terrific. She's a great friend of the University of Toronto, and she has worked a great deal in economics. Studied with Michael Porter, a name you might be familiar with, and now she is working on global healthcare and doing a wonderful job in that arena and helping advance healthcare, particularly in developing economies. Terrific, terrific woman. Moving ahead, we want to take a look at disruptive technologies because of the complexity of the phenomena. We're looking at something that is startling, difficult to figure out, and so therefore we need a more sophisticated model, I believe, to appropriately describe it. The second is that in technology, you're always trying to figure out where to place your bet. Each one of the bets you place has strategic implications, and you need to understand quite what changes the rules or when the changes in rules in the game are going to occur. Continuous models suggest change is, it's periodic, incremental, driven by market forces, and the things that determine selection are outside the marketplace. It's not really something that is under your control as a manufacturer or designer. Discontinuous models, episodic, they're sharp. There's sharp winners and losers created by the interaction between the firm, the industry, and the former technological choices they have made. And in this case, we start to see that forces that occur that within the industry, as well as things that happen outside of it, um, play an important role. So put differently, continuous models suggest adaptation, continual adaptation by all is feasible. Discontinuous suggests that there are going to be winners and losers and likely extinction for some. So we're going to turn our attention now to the type of selection forces that exist, the implications of different types of change, and with the goal of always thinking about what you, as a strategist, can do about it. We saw this chart last week. When we overlaid all the different models, what we see are different periods of time, marked disruption. You can blend all these models together, but the key thing to look at here is that change is lumpy. It's episodic, and we need to understand what the drivers of change within those periods. With radical innovation, when we see the sharp changes, what's going on here is that we're seeing truly different ways of organizing or of implementing technologies. So in periods of radical change in particular, all bets go off the table, particularly difficult to predict. Henderson and Clark focused on elements of the technological system. They start with a premise that products are comprised of components, physically distinct units, and systems, which is a description of the way in which those parts fit together. We're all familiar now that the car manufacturers, Ford, Chrysler, are really assemblers. They make They do produce their own engines, but a lot of the components, almost all of them in fact, are farmed out and made by other producers. The cars are then assembled by Ford, Chrysler, and others. The knowledge of how they go together, as well as the knowledge of what's in each component, is the province of the manufacturer. But the modularity of their production allows for low-cost production by outsourced firms. What Henderson and Clark contend is that over time there is change in an industry going from integration toward increased modularity, and that depending on the type of technological change that occurs within a module will dictate whether or not that particular change in that particular module will shape or alter the forces of competition in a market. Are they going to disrupt the status quo? Sorry, I got two there. They observe that since products are complex and they're composed of modules, you need to think not only about what's in the module, but the relationships between them. The extent of change within a module sometimes dictates whether or not it fits, continues to work well, productively complement other portions of the product or system being manufactured. So it's the relationship between, it's not only change in a particular module, but it is change in the architecture, the design, that has a strong influence on who's going to win and who's going to lose when new technologies are introduced. The hypothesis, I apologize, this is going too quickly. The hypothesis is that there are different types of change. When we think about the design of the components, if it stays the same, in her language, reinforced, you can start to see that it's modular. And if you take a look at it where it's reinforced and the linkages between the components are unchanged, this is called incremental change. You just take the new, you plug it into the old, and you're ready to rock and roll. When you're changing linkages between the components, but everything else remains the same in terms of the design or production of the good or service, now you've got something she calls modular. All right. So you're changing out modules, but everything else is being done the same. It's a shift from you're changing the system of design by altering out components, but the overall pattern is still consistent. When you have new linkages and new technologies, this is called radical change. When you have to change not only the way that you think and integrate one portion of a product with another, but also the components that are come to an understanding of what's going on within each component. These are difficult to understand. In these particular cases, you'll start to see a lot of ferment, a lot of struggling and jockeying for position within markets as they seek to integrate and take advantage of the newer technology and understand its implications for competition in other sectors. A difficult period, but a period of change in which it's pretty easy to dictate who's going to win or lose. The ones that are really quite interesting, however, are when the linkages between the components remain unchanged, but there is something inside the technology that is really quite different. It overturns the old way of doing business. And the challenge here is when architectural change occurs, you have to change belief systems and about how things work and why in order to successfully adopt. And so architectural change is a subtle form of change that is forced upon firms and often marks a sharp turn in the fate of competitors because the changing technology itself requires new competencies for success. So if you start to think about this again, most change is incremental. It poses no threat to the status quo, but some types of change alter what the product does, how it's used, and so changes the sets of competencies and skills required for success. Architectural innovations are the most problematic because they're not modular. They initially appear to reinforce the status quo. They look like a simple change, but they are not. The problem is that they require new competencies. They look like the old skill set, but ultimately they end up being destructive, causing problems in adaptation, and you start to see a real change in the status quo. They are especially problematic because they are subtle changes, and so it takes smart people to figure it out, and then it takes talented managers to persuade the company that they need to change their ways. One of the classic examples of architectural innovations is simply in the production of computer chips. With each generation of the technologies used to produce smaller and smaller chips, a new industrial leader came to the forefront. The newer succeeding technologies were so radically different that the prior market leaders almost disappeared. Another example is in the supercomputing market, where for a period of years it was fascinating because they would produce a very high-powered computer. They'd write the tech requirements up for it, but beyond that, they really ended up with not very much documentation. The reason for it is that they did not devote too much attention to it, because if they were going to work on the next generation of equipment, of supercomputers, they had to throw out everything they were doing before and come up with a new way of doing things. So prior knowledge was not relevant to the new, and you saw different patterns of innovation in supercomputing that were really quite fascinating. The popular model of technological change, I'm going to pause this right now and go to our break this into smaller units, so we go to part 2 of our lecture.